Do we learn from history? Sometimes we don't, as we're not aware of historical facts. This video reveals secrets discovered inside the hallowed halls of the American Medical Association. These secrets reveal a conspiracy that influences government and the choices available to us for our health.
I worked in intelligence for 15 years, private intelligence. I worked for police departments doing undercover narcotics work. I worked for the FDA. They even hired me to go on a raid with them once. I was an investigator back in 1968. I was hired by an unnamed client, which I preferred to keep sacred even 30 years later. The American Medical Association was conducting a series of, I would say, a yellow journalism, a sort of like a black propaganda campaign in the media against this alternative entity. And so they hired me to go to the AMA to find out. And my adventure started in November 1968. Going to smaller medical facilities and associations, getting letters of introduction from one to the next, talking to the leading medical doctors of the day and getting them to give me letters of recommendation until I finally got to the American Medical Association. All of these people gave me letters of introduction under the guise that I was doing a book on quackery and health fraud. Actually, it wasn't called health fraud in those days. It was called quackery. I had set up an appointment with the head of the American Medical Association's Department of Investigation. His name was Doyle Taylor. He's not with us anymore. So when I got into the American Medical Association and Doyle Taylor gave me carte blanche to their files, I discovered a lot of things that I didn't know prior to going into that building. And so when Doyle Taylor told me I had carte blanche for 3 days, he just walked out of the office knowing that he was in good, I was in good hands, and I was a good fellow. And it was on that basis that I was able to copy all of the documentation that proved there was a conspiracy against the client who had hired me. When I walked in the door, I noticed cameras on the outside of the building, cameras in their marble lobby. I walked in April in Chicago. It's very cold. A nice strong wind at my back, through a revolving door, entered into this huge chamber, a foyer that was probably 30-foot ceiling and all marble, and approached by a security guard and noticed more cameras. And now I've been in the State Department building. I've interviewed people in the CIA building in Washington, D.C. This was similar to that in terms of security, and so the first thing I thought was, my God, what are they hiding in this place? And within 3 days, I found out. The American Medical Association started this committee on quackery on January 3rd and 4th, 1963. And they assembled files on every form, everything you could imagine that had anything to do with alternative medicine. Every modality, treatment, service, product, manufacturer, clinic, individual practitioners, even patients. They had files on them. As a matter of fact, their files were so complete, and the federal government of the United States and Canada and Australia came down to the American Medical Association headquarters to do research on different practitioners and alternative entities. After I had seen these documents, and this was in April of 1969, I knew they had at least 100 file cabinets full of documents on all forms of competitors who were in the alternative field. And in looking at the files that they did give me and reading other people's files for 3 days, I realized there was a common denominator. And in doing investigations, you always look for a common denominator, one thread that is constantly there and brings everyone together because that's what they have in common. Well, everyone in that file room, although I never saw all of the files, didn't need to, everyone who were in the AMA's file cabinets had one thing in common. They were drugless healing arts. So now I realize, well, what we have here is drugless healing arts versus drug arts. I realized that they were committing crimes against federal laws in the United States that had to do with anti-competitive activity. They literally were conducting a campaign against all or any alternative entity that would threaten the medical status quo of orthodox medicine. When I saw this in the AMA about all these files they had and, you know, what the two dichotomies were, I thought to myself, well, the greatest good for the greatest number, as far as I am concerned, is to expose this to the world, to let them know that the drug side of the picture is campaigning to destroy the drugless healing arts. And I said, well, the only way to do that is have some documentation. And the documentation I had was only for the client that hired me for this one job. And there were hundreds of people and entities in these files. So I thought, well, the best thing to do then would be to place somebody inside the AMA to work. And it doesn't matter how long it takes her to get to where she needs to be, but where she needs to be is in this file room here. Because when she's in the file room, anything she copies is totally okay because that's her job. And she takes work home at night to study it, fine. She wants to copy it to study it some more, fine. You know, 1970 and 71, for 2 years, this young woman, a brave young woman, went to work inside the AMA. And slowly these documents came out. Until one day I had a pile that high of documents that were really damaging to the American Medical Association. My focus was mental health quackery, and which encompassed, believe it or not, in the psychiatric world, mental health quackery encompasses religion and the belief in God. And that's a fact. Now, this is so important to understand. And it's been my experience when it comes to governments. Governments do not do, for the most part, anything on their own. They always, always, always have some vested interest, you know, someone outside of government urging them on to take action against that private individual's vested interest. Like the AMA has a vested interest in seeing that some herb companies close down. So they urge them to raid the herb company.
The whole medical profession was captured some years ago by the pharmaceutical industry. That's a shocking statement. It was literally captured, financially captured at the turn of the century, when it was decided by certain people who had powerful financial interests in the pharmaceutical industry. It was decided that they would clean up the act, so to speak, of the medical profession. There was a study performed, it was called the Flexner Report. I think it was published in 1910, but it was begun, the initial research was done, I think, in 1905. And it was written by Abraham Flexner. Now, Flexner had powerful connections with the Carnegie Foundation and the Rockefellers. It turned out that Carnegie and the Rockefellers both had strong financial interests in the pharmaceutical industry. And he issued his report calling for all of these reforms in medical education in America. And it was a very good report. But what people didn't realize is that he was really being financed by the Carnegies and the Rockefellers. Why would they do that? Was it just because they were philanthropic and they wanted to help people, or did they have some other motive in mind? Well, it turns out they really had some other agenda. The Flexner report was published, and then there was a great hue and cry to bring about the reforms that they called for. Immediately, it was the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie Fund that stepped forward and said, we will provide the money. We will be great benefactors. And they put millions up to those medical schools that they deemed to be worthy of their generosity. Well, how did they determine which universities, which medical schools would be worthy of their generosity? And the answer is those that were willing to institute heavy pharmaceutical courses into their universities, and those that would switch their training over heavy on research into drug research. Those that declined to do that did not receive the money, and they quickly fell by the wayside because they couldn't keep up with their competitors who were getting this transfusion of millions of dollars from the donors. If you look at any of the great medical centers in America, and I think this is true around the world as well, and you see where the money comes from to sustain these centers, you will see it comes primarily from the pharmaceutical industry. And as a result of that, the institutions are heavy in their training in favor of drug and drug therapy for just about everything. I don't care what you go to your doctor for, if it's a hangnail, a headache, even a broken bone. They're going to send you out of there with a prescription for something because that's what they have been trained to do. So this is how I can say a moment ago that the medical profession has been captured by the pharmaceutical industry.
What we discovered is that it was the American Medical Association, Doyle Taylor, who sat at the head of that table and directed the United States government agencies to take action against the targets that the American Medical Association, the Arthritis Association, the Rheumatism Foundation, and the American Cancer Society determined were threats to them and what they were doing. All right? All sorts of alternative cancer modalities, treatments, and services and products were targeted. Even the copper bracelet for arthritis was targeted. Books were targeted. Fred Stark's books, Adele Davis's books. You know, you name it, they went after it. And it didn't matter what country, by the way, because the long tentacles of the AMA reached into Canada, reached into Australia, reached into Europe. And they spread their propaganda from their little file cabinet. So in 1975, there were documents from inside the American Medical Association that were leaked out by, let's call them friends of mine, to the media across the United States. The first one to receive it was Garnet News Syndicate, I believe, and Scripps Howard, I think, was the first in Garnet, and then big newspapers like the Washington Post, New York Times, and it just went all over the country. The leaking of these documents from the AMA, from inside the AMA, happened just at the time when the Nixon fiasco occurred, and he was brought down by a insider in the Nixon administration who leaked documents to the press, and the press dubbed this person deep throat. So these documents were leaked from inside the American Medical Association. On the tail end of that mentality, these documents started coming out from the AMA. And so instead of calling him deep throat, they called him sore throat. Okay, so basically, you know, the American Medical Association dissolved, you know, the Committee on Quackery and the Department of Investigation in 1975. Then in 1987, they lost a huge federal trade case where the federal government of the United States found and ruled that they were in violation of trade laws and anti-competitive activity, and they were guilty of basically conducting a conspiracy to destroy chiropractic.
My wife and I were doing public relations for entities having problems with government agencies. That was our specialty. That is definitely a specialty. It's called crisis management. We were very good at it, and we were based in California. Then one day we got our first health professional, and we were able to deal with that issue for them. We were dealing with people who were having problems when the government would come in and do things that were really unwarranted, like use bad publicity against the person to get them to cave in. Then we got another health professional, then another, then another. And it wasn't too long before I had to take one of my clients to lunch and say to them, "What's this alternative medicine thing? What is this?" Because the term kept coming up, and that was the beginning of our education in alternative medicine. And I said to myself, this is America. This can't really be happening here, but it is happening. We got more and more clients involved in alternative health who are having problems with agencies. It's my belief, after careful research, that there is an organized suppression group here functioning in America, and if not the world. And their purpose is to suppress new things that compete with drugs. And the apparatus is visible to a point. After the Wilk versus the AMA case was ended in 1987, the case that we all know was the chiropractors versus the American Medical Association, where the chiropractors were complaining about the AMA infringing on their rights to practice. The chiropractors won that case. The AMA was ordered to give up that covert operation, and they did. Shortly thereafter, several other groups popped up pretending to be consumer groups. In 1996, the Federation of States Medical Boards, along with the Quackbusters, I call them, hosted a convention in Chicago. It's infamous. Plenty of records about it. And at that convention, they characterized health fraud as alternative medicine. The whole focus of their presentation was to do exactly that. They tried to shift the definition of health fraud over to alternative medicine. And they had some success. That convention in '96, they made alliances. And then 1997, they had another convention with the Association of Attorney Generals. And they were training government people. The Federation of States Medical Boards has the contract with most medical boards to do several things. They do the licensing of MDs, they conduct the licensing exams, but they also were training investigators on how to investigate. They provided training classes. All over the country, there were events scheduled training people to believe, or at least supervisors and investigators, to believe that alternative medicine was health fraud.
The website for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services includes the text of a speech by an FDA official to the Special Committee on Aging of the United States Senate on September 10, 2001. The FDA official cites Quackwatch Inc. as their resource for health fraud.
This is like this is so unreal to me that these people wield that kind of power that they could train government agencies on what a quack is when they're working for the pharmaceutical industry's vested interest on going after the quacks because they're the economic competitors to the drug companies. So what happened after the leaks and sore throat and the $1 million fine and the IRS coming after them for $23 million, I mean, they were dying in the water. They were about to sink. This was a ship that was sinking at the time, and I probably should have torpedoed it, but it looked like it was sinking, so I walked away saying, great, we did it. You know, that's it. But it rose again from the dead. If you want to understand what's going on in the present, you have to know history. And if you can see that in today's economic competitive healthcare field, that the same thing is going on today that was going on in the 50s and 60s, 50 years ago, there's got to be something that's keeping it going. And in 1995, I took everything from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and into the 90s, put it all together, took a year off, wrote my book, The Assault on Medical Freedom. There is an effort, a concerted effort, presently, and it will go on until it's stopped. And even when it's stopped, it'll probably rise again. Yeah, maybe not as strong as the first time, but it'll rise again. And you know, it needs to be stopped. And the only way to stop it is to get the truth out, and I want to get the truth out. If you decide that you're going to do something about this, even if it's just talk about what you know now and spread the truth, then, you know, you're going to make a difference.